Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Becca Iteregi, and I am the Vice President of Donor Engagement here at the Foundation. Thank you for being part of our donor community. On this call today, we've got fund holders, staff, and board leadership. My role is to welcome you, introduce today's webinar, and facilitate your questions. But first, a bit of background. As many of you know, in 2024, we partnered with Colby to conduct Maine's first civic health study. In fact, about a year ago, we held a webinar for fund holders on this topic, featuring some of the people behind the research discussing its findings. While a recording of the webinar will be available on Fund Connection, we'll include it and a copy of the study itself in the follow-up to this. The study revealed that Maine is full of bright spots and strength, to be sure, but one of the key takeaways from that study was, and this should not be a surprise, residents of this great state tend to trust Augusta, do not trust DC, but do trust those in their community. They may not always agree with their neighbors, but they do trust them, and they trust their local news sources. So when news arrives in their mail or inboxes from a local source whose bylines are those of neighbors or friends of friends, and what is being reported is what is being experienced, it's trustworthy. And we know that when we are informed about what's happening in our community, we're more likely to be engaged and the community is strengthened. But you all know that. You're here to learn more about what the Foundation is doing to strengthen local journalism. Our Press Forward effort is led by Senior Advisor Lisa DeSisto, and boy, are we lucky to have her. Before joining the Foundation over the summer, she served as CEO of the Maine Trust for Local News and left that post at the end of last year. She joined what was at the time known as Maine Today Media in 2012 as CEO, and it was a group of local newspapers and websites that included the Portland Press Herald. She led the organization through 2 ownership changes, digital subscription growth, and portfolio expansion. Before moving to Maine, she worked for 17 years at the Boston Globe, serving as the leader of Boston.com, the Globe's website, as well as running advertising strategy. She's the former president of the Maine Press Association and currently serves on the board of the Associated Press. Lisa's expertise is in business model strategy. She's not a journalist or an editor, even though some people ask her to edit their kids' college essays. And with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Lisa. Again, please feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function at any time, and this webinar will be recorded and posted in Fund Connection. Take it away, Lisa.
Great. Thank you so much, Becca. I am going to share my screen. I really don't like that I can't see all of you, but I'm just going to assume that you're all there and you are fully engaged. And Becca and Christina, you'll shout out questions to me as they come up, correct? Okay, great. So thank you everyone for spending your next 47 minutes with us, or however it nets out. It is so perfect to have Press Forward Maine nested within the Maine Community Foundation, because the fundamentals of having a vibrant, free press that provides fact-based information to local communities is essential, both to carry forward the work that the Maine Community Foundation does and just to make sure that communities are healthy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up kind of the national picture and how Press Forward works at the national level. And then we're going to drill into Maine and how Press Forward is responding. And again, throw your questions in the Q&A and I will hopefully answer them intelligently. So let's go forward. 1 second. There we go. So I'm sure you've all heard the statistics that newspapers are closing at an alarming rate across the country, and there are many factors that are driving it. It's a really challenged, I guess I'll call it a broken business model, with advertising really slipping away, or it's corporate ownership that is squeezing profits out by eliminating journalists and also leaving ghost newspapers where you have a newspaper that doesn't have a single reporter on staff. And that leads to millions of Americans not having access to trusted local news and information. And I also want to set up that this conversation today and the work that Press Forward is doing is really about local news. It's about community news. It's about statewide news. We're not plugged into to national news sources because we really believe that we can have the most impact at the hyper local, at the community level. So when a community loses its local newspaper, bad things happen. Civic engagement drops, and this has been proven out in research. The number of people running for public office declines, voter turnout declines, and polarization actually intensifies. And part of this is driven by people turning to social media to get their news and information. And I think we all know that the algorithms of the leading social websites make it so you just see more of the things that you're interested in, and it fuels your belief system, so you just are not exposed to other perspectives. And communities without newspapers see increased cost, tax rates go up, and it's really important to have people covering those municipal meetings to hold the local officials accountable. So with this situation, this crisis happening in communities across the country, Press Forward was formed to really combat this. And it was founded by the MacArthur and the Knight Foundations and is really a national coalition and gaining lots of momentum. The objective is to strengthen local newsrooms, is to address longstanding gaps in coverage, both in geographic coverage and also in coverage of topics. Advance public policy. How can legislation help reinforce news outlets and journalism? And then also to scale infrastructure to help newsrooms and news outlets that exist or need to be creative, give them the resources that they need to thrive. So Press Forward has taken a local chapter model. Presently, there are 41 chapters in 30 states. And we, coming online this summer, we're one of the later chapters to the game, which is amazing because we can then learn from all the people who have gone before us, avoid some of the mistakes that they made, and also just really tap into them to figure out how they're having the most impact. The Press Forward National Organization is housed at the Miami Foundation, and I just have to say they do a remarkable job connecting all of us, providing us with content, giving us access to resources. The other thing that's really cool about the 41 local chapters, about half of them are housed at community foundations, because it wasn't just the Maine Community Foundation that realized this work aligns with the work that community foundations are doing across the country. So that's really good news. And you can see from this map, there are a couple of places that would benefit from a Press Forward local chapter. And we are a statewide organization, so we are the main chapter, whereas in other states with obviously larger populations, they have multiple chapters serving individual cities. So how are we faring? How are we faring in Maine? Actually, surprisingly well. None of the bad actors who own newspaper groups in other states are present here, and we're so thankful for that. Aside from the Maine Trust for Local News, who's owned by the nonprofit National Trust for Local News, all of the other newspapers in the state are locally owned and independent, and that's really rare. We also are very fortunate to have Maine Public, which is exceptionally strong when you compare it to other public TV and radio stations across the country. I think you probably all know that they were hit by the cuts in federal funding. And because there's such support for Maine Public in Maine, while it was certainly a blow and a financial gap they needed to fill, there are so many other stations across the country where their percentage of revenue that came from federal funding is much, much higher, putting them on the brink of closure. So that's really just to say that that in Maine, we're lucky. And I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about some promising community startups that are also very encouraging. But we need a dose of reality here. Over the past several years, we've seen a loss of jobs. We've seen many journalists leave the industry because the demands are high and the pay is low. We've also seen a loss of publications. Right now, Maine only has one Sunday newspaper, which is the Maine Sunday Telegram. And most recently, we have seen more community weeklies close. Also, the dailies that do exist, none of them publish 7 days a week anymore, and many of them have cut back their actual physical delivery because the economics are so challenging there. The other thing that's really hard for us to do is get our arms around all of this data. The source for this is 2019, so there's not a lot of accurate information on analyzing the media ecosystem in our state. And 90,000 people, so almost 10% of our population, live in a news desert in Maine. What's a news desert? A news desert is a county or a community where they are not served by a single dedicated news outlet. So we have two counties in Maine right now, Somerset and Waldo, that have no a dedicated media outlet, and three counties that are one outlet, that only have one outlet. So if that one outlet closes, they move to full news desert status. As I mentioned, the business model is really challenging. Advertising, which was one of the key revenue sources, has evaporated or moved to other mediums, especially digital. And misinformation, as I mentioned, really exists very dramatically on social media platforms. And because people didn't grow up in households where people read newspapers and understand how journalism works, it's really hard for the average person, especially the younger demographic, to even understand misinformation and to evaluate sources and understand that local journalism is vetted by an editor. There are multiple sources. So that kind of runs, unchecked. And as I mentioned, we're really struggling with outdated audience research. But there are reasons for optimism, and I would love to spend more time on these slides because they're so upbeat. So one of the things since I started in this role that I've been delighted to discover is that there are a plethora of new grassroots emerging nonprofit community sites sprouting up across the state. And those efforts are fueled by volunteers. I don't know what it is, but journalists love to retire to Maine. And when they get here, they can't stop writing, reporting, and editing, and many of them are starting up nonprofit news sites. So you're seeing them in Sanford and Springvale. You're seeing them in South Berwick. You're seeing them on Peaks Island. I went to a meeting probably 2 weeks ago at the library in Kennebunk, and a group of 5 women had a community meeting attended by about 30 or 35 people who were interested in restarting a community news site for Kennebunkport, and Arundel. They were served by the Kennebunk Post, which recently stopped publishing, and everyone in the room basically said, we didn't realize what we had until it was gone. And some people referred to it as like a grieving process with the loss of their local news site. So there are so many more resources for them now to really start something. So I'm really heartened by that. As a follow-up, if you haven't seen it, we will definitely send you links to some crazy national publicity that the Mid-Coast Villager has received. There was a feature story on them in the New York Times and then a piece on CBS This Morning. The Mid-Coast Villager covers communities on the Mid-Coast. It's a for-profit operation, and it's owned by Reed Brower, who previously owned the Maine Trust for Local News, and I worked for him for many years. And he just can't, he's a serial entrepreneur, and he can't stop thinking and innovating. And they are doing things to fuel local journalism, hosting writer retreats in Camden. They opened a news cafe where they sell tuna melts, but they have programming throughout the week. There's a cancer support group in the morning. There's a group of civic leaders that come together to talk about town issues. The cafe is vibrant, and I encourage you to go there because the newsroom is above the cafe. So the reporters and editors come down, they have lunch there. I mean, it feels like something out of like, like a TV movie. I mean, for sure. So if you have a chance, definitely go there. And it's so great that they got this national coverage because it really puts Maine on the radar screen. I've also been encouraged to see increased reporting capacity efforts. You may have seen that the Maine Monitor has launched something called Monitor Local. So in addition to the investigative reporting that they are now going into underserved counties in Maine, Washington, Franklin, Oxford, and one more I can't think of right now, and offering more coverage in there and using a string of freelancers to help populate that and covering more municipal meetings. I think we learned recently that like 33% of the municipal meetings in Maine are either live streamed or covered. So that's a pretty large percentage of meetings that, I mean, I hate to say that they're going on in the dark, but they basically are. So kudos to Monitor Local for expanding. And then also we've made a great connection with the community news hub that has been created at the University of New England, where now they don't have a journalism major, but they have a bunch of students who are really interested in learning about reporting and editing and are producing articles for some of those community newspapers that I mentioned. In fact, one of the community news reporter students has gone on to be hired by the Maine Monitor. So it's really important that there are people that still want to go into journalism, and starting at the university level is really a great concept. And I will say that broadband penetration in the state continues to improve, and that is just so critical because the future of print is really in question as the economics of it continue to decline. So making sure, especially that older Mainers are ready for that transformation to digital and having access to reliable, fast broadband is critical. Now, let me tell you my favorite story about something awesome that's happening on the local level. And if any of you are lucky enough to live in Harpswell, you know about the Harpswell anchor. I see Becca raising the roof because she lives there and loves it. So the Harpswell anchor, like many of the community news sites that I mentioned, is a nonprofit, and their a longtime owner, probably 5 years ago now, was looking to kind of close the doors. And a group of community volunteers came together and they, quote, raised the anchor. And now it is a vibrant print and digital publication that is doing an unbelievable job increasing civic engagement, connecting the community, and reporting on the issues that are unique to Harpswell. Last March, they ran a 4-page print insert on the comprehensive town plan. Residents were captivated by this and eager to have a say in the plan. And as they had a town meeting and brought everyone together, the fire department had to close the community center down because they were over capacity. Now, in many other communities that don't have a local newspaper, how would people even know that a comprehensive town plan is being discussed? It's an absolutely amazing story. And they are really smart. They have a professional staff, an experienced development officer, and just an ace editor who is just doing tremendous work there. And they're smart because they're asking their readers about their experience with the anchor. And this is what their most recent reader survey showed. 64% support local businesses that run ads in the anchor. 45% have a better understanding of local issues, and you can see many of those are real specific to coastal Harpswell. 43% are now actively engaging with the community, voting in local elections, volunteering with a nonprofit, or attending a meeting. And 95% trust the anchor. Now, I have never seen a news source get a 95% trust ranking from their readers. A really, really phenomenal case study. What we're asking ourselves is, can the anchor work in more rural, less affluent communities? Will this work in Millinocket? Will it work in corners of Washington County? Will it work in Standish that actually doesn't have a local newspaper? That's something that we're setting out to learn about. So now I think I'm like a half hour in and I'm going to talk to you about Press Forward Maine. So our vision at Press Forward Maine is simple. We want all people to have access to trusted local news and information in Maine. And as I mentioned, that is just not the case right now with so many people living in news deserts or close to news deserts in our state. So what have we done so far? Well, in a very Maine Community Foundation like way, we assembled a group of committed, passionate, expert volunteers to help lead this effort forward. I'm not going to go through every single person on the list, but I just want to describe a couple of the folks because it demonstrates the diversity of thought, experience, perspective that we've brought together to figure out how can we be most helpful and kind of and raising all boats and making sure that we can achieve our goal of making certain that all Mainers have access to local news. Emily Barr, she's someone that I know because she also serves on the board of the Associated Press, which is how I first met her. She's also on the board of the Maine Monitor, and she ran a group of TV stations for the Washington Post owners, the Grahams. The funny thing about that is it was the TV stations that were making all the money for the Washington Post. And this is in the pre-Bezos era, of course. So she brings great perspective because TV news, and we didn't talk a lot about it, is still just a leader in audience aggregation. So many people still turn to local TV news to get their information. Carlos Berrio Nuevo, it is a delight that we have him in Georgetown, Maine, because he works for a national company called Public Media Company that helps public media stations figure out their business model. His insight has been invaluable. Jeannie Burgo, we found her up in Blue Hill, and she is the CEO of Internews, and one of the sub companies that she owns actually does civic engagement playbooks for local newspapers. Molly and Bryant, I'm sure many of you know, it's really important that Maine's tribes have a seat at the table so we can understand how they get their news and information and where the gaps are. And Andrew Butcher, who's president of the Maine Connectivity Authority, is the person responsible for lighting up more of Maine for broadband access. So happy to have him at the table because, as I mentioned, broadband access and access to local news will just continue to overlap. And I said I wasn't going to call out everyone, so I'm not, but I do want to call out Prashant Mittal, who is a professor at the Rue Institute, and he is a data scientist, and he is also one of the Rue's leading authorities on artificial intelligence. We need to lead in the artificial intelligence space, not be afraid of it, not catch up, and Prashant is already really pushing the advisory council on taking this posture. So really thankful to have this group of people together, thinking about where Press Forward can be helpful. It's also in a very Maine Community Foundation-like way. Listening is really critical. And we brought together through 2 sessions groups of active Maine editors, reporters, business side leaders from folks like the Maine Monitor, the Maine Trust for Local News, Maine Public, to hear what are the most pressing issues that they are facing. And to a person, they all said financial sustainability and filling funding gaps. Now, we did hold these sessions right when Maine Public found out they were losing that big piece of federal funding. But it's true for even all the nonprofits. They really have to work on their development. Local journalism is a ground game. You need to put reporters in meetings on the street, and that's expensive, which leads to the next bullet about staffing. And when times are tough, people are, often, unfortunately, the first thing to go, and that just puts more pressure on the rest of the staff that's left behind. And when you're kind of in a crisis, thinking about professional development is something that goes out the window quickly. So that's on their mind. And then also making that move from print to digital. And our friends at Anjambo Africa talk specifically about helping newcomers. How do you provide information to people who are new to Maine to help them understand how to thrive in their local communities? And we asked them, how can Press Forward be helpful? And what we heard was funding and philanthropic support for sure, and also collaboration with shared infrastructure. So does everyone need to be an expert and at drafting a newsletter? Does everyone need to have a newsroom ethics policy? So, you know, we've heard these things from them, where if we could bring people together to help to collaborate on things, they would appreciate it. And also capacity building, which, as I mentioned, like that program at UNE, that's something that could produce more journalism, more journalists, more reporting. That's something that they'd be very interested. And I really want to hit on this, and that's public awareness. There is just a lack of digital and media literacy, because it's not something that's really taught in schools anymore. That, along with civics, I think, are really lacking. And people just don't understand how to find trusted sources, how to ferret out misinformation, and why local news is really important. But always optimistic, the journalists talked about their hopefulness, and that they know how much the community supports them. And they know that there's a demand for local news. People want local journalists and news outlets to hold public officials accountable. They also are collaborating like never before. Recently, I saw the BDN and the Maine Monitor collaborated on a fundraising campaign for a specific initiative. And they also are encouraged, this is probably my friends at the Villager Group, about innovation and emerging new models, just finding new ways to tackle it, to diversify revenue, to make sure that you're sustainable. So where are we now? Well, last week or 2 weeks ago, we brought the Volunteer Advisory Council together for a half-day session in Waterville, and brought all this information that we had collected from Press Forward National, from the practitioners, to talk about where we can be most effective. And as you might imagine, we had a very spirited discussion with a variety of sizes and colors of sticky notes to help us prioritize where we want to focus. And this is what's bubbling up: audience research, ecosystem mapping. Where are the gaps in coverage, and geographically and topically? We recently had a conversation with the folks at the South Florida Press Forward chapter, and they did an extensive survey in their market, talking to their community members, who all came back and said the most important thing to them, the number one issue on their mind, is affordable housing. And when they went and did an analysis of all the news coverage in that market, only 4% of the coverage was about affordable housing. So that's a big disconnect between what the community is desperately concerned about and what's being reported on. So we hope that our research can uncover some of those disconnects. And what's great about it is the Maine Community Foundation has deep experience in thinking about big, meaty research projects like this. We also talked about public policy. We've seen in other states legislation actually get approved to provide tax credits for journalists, in Illinois and also in New York. And again, this is somewhere that Press Forward keeps us plugged into what's happening in the other chapters. But everyone was very optimistic that public policy should be something that we would look into. Also, innovation. And this is really a conversation too about transformation to digital, like getting people ready for that. And how do people want to get information? Do they want a podcast? Do they want a channel on WhatsApp? Like, are there different ways that we can reach underserved audiences with innovation? I've said it, I think I've said it 6 times: digital literacy. We need to help people understand how to ferret out trusted information. And this is something, we had a couple of convenings with prospective funders and supporters. And every time we mentioned youth engagement, everyone's eyes lit up and they leaned forward. And I think that's because they're at home with their children and grandchildren who are on their phone, not probably consuming news, but consuming lots of, let's call it questionable and value content on social media platforms. How do we get youth engaged in this conversation about local news? And then as we explore these areas, what we really need to think about is where can the Maine Community Foundation provide value? Is it through convening? Is it through grant making? Is it through programs? How can we bring the sector together so we can make certain that we achieve our goal of having all Mainers have access to quality local news and information? So that's where we're headed. We're excited to dive into this research and move it forward with our advisory council. And so with that, I guess I'm almost ready to turn it back over to Becca and also take any questions from folks. But if you're wondering right now how you can support this work, of course you can support us here at the Maine Community Foundation, but I encourage you to continue to support your local news outlets by subscribing, by donating. They all ran Giving Tuesday efforts yesterday, and I'm sure they'll continue through the end of the year. And it also makes a great gift. So do you, Becca.
Thank you, Lisa. So we have a question in the chat about noting that the advisory council seemed to be, how shall I say this, a little bit mature in age,
Yeah.
and
No.
wondering, given the obviously given the demographic profile of the state, that's somewhat to be expected. But how are you thinking, or how are you and the advisory council thinking about bringing more youth voices to the table or to the conversation?
Yeah, that is absolutely a valid question and concern. And we recognize that. I worked with some of the local universities to try to add, for the meeting that we had in Waterville, to try to add the voice of college students to the table, but everyone had a conflict, right? Like they all had finals or preparing, classes. And so we've made this great connection with UNE. We had an event a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure if anyone was there, but we had three students who are part of the Community News Hub from UNE. And when we introduced them, they got a spontaneous round of applause. So it's absolutely clear that we need to engage with youth. We also have a great connection with the Bowdoin Orient. In fact, so many of Maine's colleges and universities have really dynamic either newspapers or websites. So at the Bowdoin Orient, we're plugged into them and have kind of an open invitation to go in and meet with them and bounce things off of them. But I think we without a doubt need to add a younger voice to the advisory council.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about sort of you set forward some priorities that have been outlined by the advisory council. Do you have a sense of time frame? Like how quickly are we going to be in a position where donors who have given us money, and those on the call who may be interested in giving money to support this work, how soon will they start to see some of the work get into play and the grant making happen?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we're committed to focusing on is the research and the ecosystem mapping, because we don't want to start to create solutions that don't have any foundation in data and research. So our plan, it may sound optimistic to people, or maybe too slow, is by the end of January is to have the research project scoped out. Right. And what's great is we've made connections at Press Forward to lean into vendors that have worked with other chapters. We're talking to other chapters, and Prasant, who is on our advisory council at RU, is helping us map that out. So I feel like by the end of January, we would have a good sense of the scope of where we're going with the research. The grant making certainly, that's like a baseline expectation, I think, when it comes to the Maine Community Foundation. And we're a little reticent right now to fund operating expenses, because what we really want to do is focus on things that help the entire ecosystem. I'm not saying we won't do that, but right now we really want to like get our ducks in a row and how can we be helpful? Because it has to be sustainable, right? So that's what we're really drilling into.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think unless there are other questions that are in the queue that I am not seeing, let me just check real quick. It looks like we've addressed all the questions that have been asked. You did a great job, apparently, of setting up this conversation so that folks felt informed. And we
Yes.
will be sending this out. Yes, go ahead,
Oh, sorry.
Lisa.
Or I put everyone to sleep.
I don't think so.
I don't, it's so hard, it's so hard to tell. There's one other thing that I want to say that we're going to include in the follow-up, and I'm sorry that I cut you off. Is Press Forward has put together a video series that was narrated and produced by Charles Blow, who is a former New York Times opinion writer and author. And he was in town for an event with us a couple weeks ago. And he just speaks so passionately about the importance of local news. He grew up in a household in Louisiana where his mother, they had very little, but she made certain that she read the local newspaper every day. So there's a video series, they're all maybe like 5 or 6 minutes, to show you some of the innovation that's happening around the country in small markets and well, in large markets too, because Chicago is kind of lighting it up. And I think you'll be inspired by some of that work.
Great. I'm sure everybody will like to see that. So we will send out materials in our follow-up. I think the ask for you, all of the participants, is to spread the word, tell your friends and your neighbors that the foundation is engaged in this, share what you've learned today from Lisa. The deck will also be distributed so you can cite some of the statistics that she shared. And thank you all for joining us. Lisa, thank you for lending your expertise and providing such a thorough and thoughtful overview of this really important work. And thank you all for participating and choosing us as your philanthropic partner. And so oh, and yes, as noted here in the chat, please fill out the survey when it comes to you to tell us your thoughts on this webinar and other things. So thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you for supporting Mainers.